Welcome. My name is Pamela Kearns of Peyote Dreams Jewelry Designs, and this video is going to continue on our left-handed beading instruction journey on how to do even count flat peyote. So today we're going to take a look at how to start peyote, how to create a bit of a pattern, how to zip it around an object, as well as how to convert a flat band into a bracelet. So today we're going to be using various materials, needle and thread to accomplish our task. Let's take a look at what we're working with today.
Work surface, and what you see in front of you is an example of flat even count peyote. And the beads we're going to be using today are Delica size 8. It's not a typical size bead you would do for most of your projects, but for our purposes today it is perfect because you're going to be able to see exactly what I'm doing. This sample is in size 11. This is in size 8, so that's more the size we're going to be working today. So to get started, I have a large size 6 seed bead, and that's going to be our stop bead. I also have a needle, beading thread, and let's get started. So if you've never used a stop bead before, I'm going to slip it on. The purpose of a stop bead is literally to stop beads from falling off. I'm going to leave about a 6-inch tail. Frequently you use the tail thread to weave in perhaps a part of your clasp or something else, so don't make your tail threads too short. So to attach a stop bead, I'm going to go through the stop bead a couple of times without catching any thread. If I catch the thread, it's going to be very difficult to remove it later. So that's just going through. As I say, its purpose is simply to stop the beads from sliding, so it does not need to be so secure that you can't remove it later. So for even count peyote, you do need an even number of beads. So an even number is anything divisible by 2. For today's set, we're going to use 10 beads. So, or excuse me, not 10 beads, 8 beads. And we're going to be using it in 2 colors. The way I'm going to do it today will show you how to create vertical stripes. So let's pick up 8 beads. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we're going to bring them down to our stop bead, just like that. Okay, when I do peyote, I tend to hold it in my hands, and this is another reason I like to use a little extra tail thread, so that I wrap it in my fingers, and that helps to create tension. And I will hold it in my hands like this. My left hand is going to be doing the stitching. I am left-handed. And the right hand, or my non-dominant hand, is going to hold the beadwork. So we're ready to start. And by the way, this is the most difficult row. That's okay. It always is when you work with seed beads. The first row to get it started is always the most difficult. So the purpose, or what we want, is this first white bead to sit on top of the other white bead. When you do start peyote, you're going to stitch into every other bead, starting with the second bead. So in order to make this bead stand on top of the other white bead, we're going to stitch into bead number 2, which happens to be the red. Stitch in and pull through. And what you want is your bead to sit one on top of another. And as you can see, it needs a little encouragement. All you have to do is just use your thumbnail or your needle so that they sit evenly like that. So back into my hand, I'm going to pick up another white bead. This whole row is going to be white beads. We skipped this white bead, stitched into bead number 2. We're going to skip this white bead and stitch into bead number 4. As I say, every other bead. Pull through, and there is the result. Okay, we're doing great so far. Another white bead. We're going to now stitch into bead number 6. We're going to skip this white bead and into this bead, bead 6. I feel like I'm calling bingo there. Okay, so we're almost there at the end of this row. Another white bead to pick up. We're going to skip this white bead, which is bead 7, and we're going to stitch into the last bead, which is bead 8. Pull through. There is our first row of peyote done. Okay, so what's next? Well, I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult if I have to stitch right to left, and I'm sure you do too. So what we're going to do is turn our work. In other words, we're going to flip it over. If you recall, we were stitching toward the stop bead. Now we're going to stitch away from it. The other thing you're going to notice is that now we have upper and lower beads. So all of the beads we added, the white beads, are now sitting sort of like turrets on a castle. And Jill Wiseman calls them sticky uppy beads, and they are a perfect description of it. And this is now going to make life so much easier. Our next row is all going to be red. And even though I know that in my head, what I know, how I can visually see it, is that red is the first bead on the edge. So I want this bead to sit on top. I'm going to stitch through the sticky uppy bead, that white bead, just like that. Another red bead, putting it through the next sticky uppy bead. And we're going to do that all the way along. This is flat peyote, and it is this simple. Now, it's going to feel very differently if you start using small beads. So if you want to practice, I do suggest practicing with large beads. The size 8 are great just to get the feel of it. Perler beads are also great. They're those iron-on beads that kids use. They're the same shape, a little bit bigger, and I frequently teach using those beads. Okay, that row is done. I'm going to flip my work and stitch back toward the stop bead rather. My first bead is white. That's the one that's on the edge. Picking it up, and I'm going to go through that sticky uppy bead. And this is how it goes back and forth. Now there are ways to do lots of different patterns. We're going to be covering that in a future video, because it does get a little involved in how to read a pattern, and I think that needs to be its own video. We're at the end, flip and continue, this time with red. Okay, so let me get this row done, and I want to talk a couple more things. So this is like watching paint dry, I know. Here we go. Flip my work, and I'm ready to stitch back. So let's lay this down for a minute. Okay, so a couple of things. You'll notice we picked up 8 beads altogether. However, we have been working with beads at a time. That's typical. If you had put on 12 beads all at once, each row would then deal with only 6 beads. Okay, so some people do ask, how do we count rows? Well, there's a couple of ways. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is the easiest. You can also count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So a couple ways. Okay, we're back. So we have done a total of 16 rows. And we know that because as we count, we have 8 white, coming back down we have 8 red, so a total of 16. You'll notice that the red is higher than the white in both the top and the bottom. That is going to allow me, just let me fold it up here so you can see. Let me zoom in a little bit, see if that helps. You'll notice that it will then let me, what I call, zip it up. Well, everyone calls it that. what that will do is that you can join one side to another, joining all of the sticky uppy beads. It's a little hard to tell because it's, let's see if I can put it at a different angle here. Okay, so all of the sticky uppy beads, you'll notice, are on one side or another. And it'll make more sense when we actually come to do it. What does zipping do? Well, it allows you to put beading around other objects. In this case, it's a 10 mil by 10 mil cube. Here, there's a bit of a straw inside. You can use straws. So this is a bar straw, very thin but very firm, regular drinking straw. What else can you use? You can use shapes, you can use sizes of everything. You can create beaded beads, earrings, all kinds of stuff that you can link together. Okay, so the structure that we're going to use for this one is a little bit of a drinking straw, which I then split down the side. Okay, and that allows it to roll a little bit tighter as well. So if I put it in here like this, you can see how that, I think you can see there. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Okay, you can zoom in so that you see where the red on one side sticks out more than the white, and on the bottom one here, the white sticks out more than the reds. So what we're going to do is go from one side to another, zipping it up. So my thread is coming out of the white bead. It's not one of the sticky uppy beads. So I'm going to stitch across and go into this one, which happens to be the sticky uppy bead, and that's in my first row. You can see where my stop bead is. Okay, so don't worry if it gets feeling a little loose, that's typical. So I've gone through this white bead. I'm now going to go into this red sticky uppy bead, and that is on the last row that I stitched. There we go. And yes, your thread is going to tangle. It's going to want to go around whatever your structure it is. Back down to the bottom here through that white sticky uppy bead. There, he wants to tangle. Don't do that. And I'm just going to go literally back and forth. Back to the top of the beading. Did you? Yes, you did. And down to the bottom of the beading. To the top of the beading. It really wants to tangle today. And to the bottom of the beading. And our last one, at least to the last sticky uppy bead, is at the top of the beading. Now, I'm going to flip this over. My stop bead is still attached. I will remove it. However, I do want to join the top and the bottom on this side, just like I did over here. So I'm going from this red bead into this red bead. Let's flip it, turn it on its side. From this red bead where my thread is coming out to this red bead. And you can tell that there's nothing there because there is a gap. Okay, I just noticed my screen freeze a little bit there. Discovered this system of videoing does freeze a little bit, so please bear with me. Okay, come on, behave. We have an audience. There we go. So that is now zipped up. Normally what I would do then is to bury my thread. In other words, I would go from bead to bead in different directions to make sure that nothing slips out. I would remove the stop bead and also bury that. You could trim this, and then you can use a head pin, eye pin, or whatever, and to create either an earring or anything else, perhaps a beaded bead by doing a wrap loop on either side. Okay, so that is zipping, and it is extremely helpful and useful in your designs. So next section, we're going to be taking a look at how to convert a flat piece of beadwork into a bracelet that you can attach. That's upside down, so that you can attach a clasp to. Okay, we'll be right back. To create or convert a band into a bracelet, it is actually quite easy. I have done more beading, not enough for a bracelet. I add my clasps in this method. Rather than stitching the clasp directly to the band, where the clasp meets is a stress point, and it can cause bead breakage, it can cause all kinds of stuff. Also, if you want to change your clasp at any given time, this is a much easier way to do it than it is to cut threads and restitch. Trust me, you don't want to do that. So what I do is that I create a loop of beads somewhere in the middle of my beadwork, middle of the edge here, and you can take it either off of one bead or a group of beads like I've done here. So to do that, let's move these out of the way. I am going to, my thread is currently coming out of this white thread. Okay, so I need to get it so that it comes out of this red, because I'm going to create a loop of beads that is going from this red bead to this red bead. So to get from here to there, I'm to travel through the beads. And let's zoom in just a little bit, okay, so that you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. So let's hold this. As I say, I always bead in my hand. I'm going to go down and literally travel through the beads. You don't want your thread showing. With the larger beads, it's easier. With the smaller beads, you just have to be a little more careful that you don't break any beads. So I'm just going from one bead to the next, and you'll notice my thread does not show up outside the beads, and that's a good thing. Okay, we're almost there. You can see how I sort of went in increments up and over, and here we're coming out of this red bead. This is where we now are going to start our loop of beads. So I'm going to choose to do red. 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see what 7 beads looks like. You can adjust the size of your loop to whatever you want. I also tend to use odd numbers of beads. That just forms a circle better. So we're coming out of this red bead, we're going into this one. So into it and through. So that's using 7 beads. That's not bad. You can make it smaller, you can make it larger, whatever you want. Now, as I said, this is a stress point, and you want to go through this loop of beads several times. So we're going to travel through this white bead and the red bead. Here I'm going through 2 beads at a time. Sometimes you can do that with smaller beads. Sometimes it's an invitation to break a bead. So just be aware of that. Oh, come on, pick up. There we go. And you want to go through the beads as many times as you can. If it gets loose, that's okay. These large beads tend to get loose, and if you have to flip it over in your hand so that you're stitching in the proper direction, go ahead. Oops. Let's keep my hands in focus there. Here we are. You learn to stitch backwards really well. Okay, and you'll notice that I am going through that center bead so that my thread doesn't show when I'm going from one side to another. Okay, so that is going through twice. This is 3rd time. And your thread is going to catch on everything. I am just putting my thumb on top of my beads as I stitch. That helps hold them in place. It's not meant to hide anything from you. So it's just easier that way. Okay, so I have gone through there 3 times. In reality, I would probably go through a 4th, especially if I was 4th or even a 5th. But for today, we'll just do it like that. So the last step in doing any beadwork of any kind, whether peyote or any other stitch, is that you bury the thread. So to bury it is very much like traveling through it. So you're going to go in different directions from one bead to another. And you can also go in a bit of a circle. So my thread is coming out this red one. I'm going to go down the red that's beside it and back up that other side. So I've sort of taken my thread in a circle there. And that helps lock the thread. And you can continue going through beads and threads in different directions, just like that. And if your thread sort of wants to pull, just give it a gentle tug and it'll fall into place. So that is converted now. That one side of the band has a loop. So let's trim this thread and we'll take a look at the other side. Okay, so here's where our stop bead is. We need to remove the stop bead. It's easier if you just take your needle and poke at the thread and let it pull out like that. Okay. On this side, what I would do, and by the way, yes, it would be a whole lot longer, is that I would thread the needle, put the needle on red, and travel through so that I exit this white and create a white band. It is not going to line up. Okay, this is even count peyote does not have, or flat, yeah, even count peyote does not have a center line that odd count peyote does. So, but if you create a line there or a loop there, then you can join that even as a link for something that is short. The other thing you can do, which I do recommend as you get to develop a color stash, is to do little samples of color swatches. And you could do, it doesn't have to be a large swatch, it could just be, you know, 3 or 4 rows, very narrow, with a loop on the end, and you attach a little label to that. So that gives you an idea more about how your beads look, because sometimes what they look like in a tube is not the same as what they look like when you stitch it. So that concludes today's video. I hope you found that informative. I hope the technology hasn't frozen too much on us here. If there's other things you would like to see, other stitches, our next video will be about odd count peyote. But if there are other stitches such as right angle weave, cubic right angle weave, anything like that, especially for left-handed stitching. Okay, so please share this video, subscribe, tell your left-handed beading buddies about it, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.